So, tell you what I am enjoying though is Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We are in the 5th episode. It is called Charades. And last season, we had an episode called Spock Amok, where he and his fiance try to do it's like an advanced mind melt called I don't remember the exact term for it, but it was like they merged their katras, but it ended up doing a Freaky Friday body swap episode. And this episode kind of continues in that vein of having a humorous Spock episode revolving around his engagement to his fiance. But in this episode, he and Chapel are in a shuttlecraft and they're like examining a rift created by some like extra dimensional beings. They fall into it and then they just like appear back in the shuttle by the Enterprise with a note left saying, oh yeah, these things fell into our transport tube and were injured. We put them back together. There was an irregularity with one of them, so we fixed the irregularity. And the irregularity is that they were looking at the DNA of both Spock and Chapel. And, well, Chapel's fully human, but Spock is half human and half Vulcan, so they figured that must have been a mistake, so they put him back fully human. There's some issues that I've got with how they play that off, because as you would expect, if you're telling a story where suddenly Spock is fully human, yes, you would expect, okay, he's going to be more emotional now, and that's how they do it, but I don't think that makes sense. Like, I think it's a funny episode, but I don't think that makes sense, because the implication being is that, oh, well, he's not Vulcan, so he's not, the stoic, logical, cold, emotionless person anymore. But Vulcans aren't emotionless. Actually, Vulcans have very strong emotions. They're so strong that they're dangerous, and they deliberately suppress them. So for him to lose those Vulcan emotions and just have the normal human ones to deal with, it doesn't quite make sense that he would, because he doesn't lose his memory. He's still, he's still Spock. He's just, dealing with going through a kind of a puberty is what they compare it to. But his conditioning to suppress his emotions should still be there. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense that they would do it that way. But there's another thing that they bring up in the episode, and it's actually a callback to something that was established in Star Trek Enterprise, is that Vulcans have a much stronger sense of smell than humans, and also Vulcans think that humans stink. So most Vulcans that are serving with humans take a nasal suppressant so that they aren't as impacted by the smell of humans. But that doesn't make sense for Spock, because one, Spock's half human, so I think his sense of smell would probably be a little lessened just because he's not full Vulcan, but also he was raised by a human, so he would have been used to that smell anyway, and he would probably have some of that smell himself. This is kind of an issue that I've got in general with how they treat Spock as functionally full Vulcan for the show, even though he's half human, and there are elements that deal with the cultural problems with being a mixed race kid. Biologically, he's almost never treated differently from other full Vulcans. There's never a moment where it's like, oh, well, a full Vulcan would have this physiological reaction, but you're also human, so you have it differently. Pretty much his Vulcan physiology completely supersedes his human physiology. And I kind of understand why that is, because he was the first Vulcan in the franchise. So all other Vulcans were built with him as the template, even though he's only half Vulcan. There's issues that I've got that's not necessarily something that this episode started. It's just an ongoing thing with how Spock is treated as a Vulcan compared to other Vulcans that I don't think the writers have really thought out, or if they have thought out, they've decided they don't want to deal with it. But like I said, this is a very nitpicky critique. And as far as the story itself goes, I think it's very funny. It's a pretty lighthearted episode. It's Spock learning once he's fully human, he no longer has to have the nasal suppressant, and he discovers the smell of bacon for the first time and eats way too much. There's a bit where he's hanging out at the bar with a bunch of friends and somebody tells a joke and he gets the joke and starts really laughing to the point where everyone else is a little uncomfortable with it. But it's one of those things where it's he's going through a second puberty, I guess. Yeah, not a third puberty, a second puberty. But I also, that's one other thing, I guess, back to the physiology, is when they say that, well, you're dealing with human emotions and not Vulcan emotions, so you're basically going through a puberty. And I'm just like, but he would have already gone through a half-human puberty, you know? Anyway, they're trying to find a way to put Spock back together, fix him, but they're in the Vulcan system, and he has been putting off an engagement dinner with T'Pring's parents for quite a while, and, you know, the excuses for avoiding it kind of run dry when they're on half-duty shifts and they're in the system. And, like, they don't want to tell anyone that he's, like, fully human, especially because T'Pring's mom hates humans and, like, is basically looking for any reason to like call off the engagement. And when Spock's mom comes aboard and immediately can tell that Spock's human, she's like, okay, well, Spock, I always raised you as a Vulcan, but now that you're human, I gotta raise you as a human and I gotta teach you how to lie. So, like, they go through and prepare, like, all of the different things that the ceremonial engagement dinner entails for Vulcan society. And it's like a very, you know, strict, regimented thing where Spock has to, like, pour tea from a boiling metal pot with no handles. For a Vulcan, that doesn't even hurt to pick it up, but for a human, he picks it up and, you know, it's really hot. And so he has to basically figure out how to hold it, pour the tea slowly, and then put it back on the burner without anybody seeing the pain in his face. There's actually one of the things is that he's supposed to share a memory of his mother through mind melding, but he can't mind meld. And they try to do a fake mind meld, like a practice run, and, like, everyone can tell that it's not going to work. And so basically they're like, okay, well, that's going to be like one of the last moments of the ceremony. So long as we can get the cure before then, we'll just try and wing it through. And, you know, they give Spock fake ears to put on, because, you know, he's just got his normal human ears now, or not normal human ears. He's got human ears. Doesn't have his normal Vulcan ears, so they have to put fake ones on. And I think originally he was going to tell T'Pring as soon as she came aboard, but then when he hears her talking about how her mom is looking for any excuse to call off the engagement, and that both of them are going to be mind melding with their mothers to share a memory as part of the ceremony, they don't explicitly say it, but that's the line, and that's when Spock decides not to tell T'Pring that he's human at the moment. But he ends up going through everything and pulling it off, and Chapel is able to go back into that transit thing and talk to the aliens there who put Spock together wrong, and she has to convince them that they did it wrong. And they're like a very, like, bureaucratic thing. They're like, oh, well, your complaint is outside the period, so no remediation will be happening or anything like that. And she eventually convinces them to do it by expressing her feelings for Spock, and because they're like, oh, friends are not enough for us to seek remediation outside the complaint period. And so she has to say, it was like, well, he's more than a friend to me, and the way you put him back has changed him, and he has lost things about him that I like, so you need to fix it. And so they tell her how to fix it eventually, and she goes and gets Spock done right before the mind melds, and so he's able to do that. But then at the end, once everything is satisfactory, T'Pring's mother kind of gives Spock a compliment, but it's a very backhanded compliment in that she's just like, I didn't think you would be able to do it, but you did well despite your handicap. And he's like, my handicap of being half human, you mean? She's like, yes, of course. And he's like, so full human would be completely incapable of doing this? And she's like, yes, of course. He's like, well, then it would probably surprise you to learn that I've been human this whole time. And T'Pring's mom is awful. So, like, you know, I figured that's how that plot was gonna go from the beginning. But T'Pring's father, he's kind of a funny character because he's like kind of a henpecked spouse where he shows up and he actually really likes the hors d'oeuvres that Pike has prepared for the dinner, but then, like, his wife is just like, oh, this isn't prepared in the traditional Vulcan way, and he's just like, oh no, of course, my dear, you are correct. I see it now. He just kind of wants to have snacks and be a nice guy and dealing with an awful wife. It kind of makes me think of, there was a TNG episode when Deanna Troi was supposed to get married. It was an arranged marriage, and so, like, her fiance's family comes aboard, and I think it's the first episode where we meet her mom, Loxana Troi, and so you've got, like, kind of the familial bickering there. There's a lot of funny stuff in this episode, but ultimately, Spock's decision to not tell T'Pring that the accident had turned him human, that pisses her off, and she's like, I thought we could trust each other with everything, but you couldn't trust me with this. So I think we need to take a break. I think that's probably the beginning of the end of the relationship. Obviously, it doesn't formally end until Amok time, which is in TOS, so we'll see that happen there. But they're definitely doing more of the Kirk to Pring Chapel love triangle, and we'll see how that plays out. Actually, something that I noticed that people were saying was, we don't actually know how this love triangle could end up, because we do know that Spock doesn't end up with T'Pring, but we don't necessarily know that he doesn't end up with Chapel. Obviously, in the original series, Chapel is like unrequited love for Spock, but she was such kind of a paper-thin character in that show that they can just do anything they want with her here. And also, like, I have to point out that in TNG, Picard mentions how he attended the wedding of Sarek's son, and unless Spock has another secret sibling that we don't know about, I assume that means that Picard was at Spock's wedding, and we don't know who Spock married. And sure, like, Picard was there, so, you know, it's in the future, but, like, humans live, I don't know, like 150 years in Star Trek time, so Spock could totally easily marry Chapel in, like, 100 years. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But yeah, it's a fun, kind of, you know, lighthearted episode that kind of advances the whole will they, won't they with Spock and Chapel. Highly recommend it. As I always do with this show, I think everybody should be watching it. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm trying to get my channel monetized, so your view means a lot. Don't forget to toss me a like and subscribe and ring the bell. I stream these reviews every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific, so catch me live and join in on the convo. You can find all my socials in the description below, and thank you to all my patrons with a special shout out to Piftle Cakes. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.